We'll wait for a few minutes and we'll start straight at 12 IST. We have 4 minutes to go.
Correct.
So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, depending on where you are. And thank you for taking time to join this session on the ISO 27701 for privacy today. I'm Ashwin, and my colleague is here with me, and we will be having this session for 45 minutes today, and 15 minutes will be Q&A session. I request everybody to post their questions in the Q&A section, and at the end of the session, we will take them in sequence as we received. So depending on the time we have, we will only take them in the order, right? And then to keep the respect for everybody's time. We will start on time and we will close on time. And we will start the session now, right? And for saving the bandwidth, I'm going to put my video off, and because it's going to be the screen that you're going to see and not me. So I think that's fine with all of you. So welcome again to today's session on ISO IEC 27701. We will have a quick brief introduction, then the context of cybersecurity and privacy, and of course the ISO 27000 family and the 27701 leading to 27701 implementation and then certification, of course. So quick introduction about us here in the video. Okay, so that's my background. I've been an auditor since the year 2002, focusing on cybersecurity and privacy, mostly on the GRC side. And of course, I did some implementations also in the past in my previous companies where I worked. I hold certifications such as the CITP, which is from AICPA, and I'm basically an CPA and MBA. CITP is the CPA related technical security qualification. The SSPCs, CISM, and so on, several other ones that I did throughout my 19 years of cybersecurity journey. And my experience goes in the auditing now for the SOC 2, which is our primary business for the last 5 years. Cloud security and privacy is part of the SOC 2 and now even the ISO. And of course, we did several engagements on security and privacy by design and all of these areas in network security, IoT, SCADA, etc. So on the privacy front, I've been trying to promote and do presentations for almost 5 years now. When we did the initial promotion on SOC 2 for privacy, very few people were interested to get themselves audited for privacy, honestly. And I've been trying to advocate to use privacy as an assurance since 5 years, but we saw the traction only after GDPR in the last 1 or 2 years, when we saw the GDPR and we have seen the several data security and privacy breaches, and of course the GDPR, the privacy fines in billions, starting with Facebook, 5 billion, and so on. The list goes on. So of late, in the last 2 3 years, people and the firms have shown interest in getting themselves assurance from a privacy perspective. And we will discuss today how the ISO 27701 will help you to attain that. These are several of our customers when we work globally. Some of the top names are well-known names, household names. Some of the lower names are work cloud startups, and we also work with several of the cloud security companies, SaaS companies rather, and we have audited them for SOC 2 and now even ISO for several of the SaaS platforms. They are now employing thousands of employees, and they have now grown up to mid-sized companies, I would say. So the cyber security context has to come before we step to any assurance framework, maybe ISO or whatever it is, because we need to understand what is that we are trying to do, what is that we are trying to save, and what is the whole context. So some of the people who are have seen my presentations on other topics earlier, some slides may be and the context may be repeating, but I apologize, but that's in the interest for everybody to be on the same page. But I'll be quick as much as possible. But we definitely need to understand the context, what we are talking about, right? So the cybercrime market is now estimated to be $10.5 trillion. 63% of all data breaches are directly linked to third parties, because this is important for us to be linking our discussions to these context. Actually, 80% of all data breaches have PII data, and there is a 140% increase in data breach notifications from on year. So this is from 2019 to 2020, but year on year we see data breaches increasing. We also see cloud security services increasing to almost $1 trillion by 2024. And 93% of companies already have a cloud strategy, and that's where the problems start. People say cloud is easy, cloud is easier to do, and people are saving time and cost and money. But so is the third party risk management increasing actually in the cloud environment, which we are realizing or not, but that's a fact. And of course, cloud is posing new challenges. That's a different discussion, not today's discussion, but this is the context that we will keep in mind for today's discussion. So 82% of the organization also use third parties for their data processing, and only 30% companies have data subject rights addressed in today's time. For third-party data security compliance, there are several tools that are being used. One of the major ones is the ISO 27001, and the 27701 is an extension to 27001 for the PII data or the privacy certification. There are other tools such as the SOC 2, which has the privacy as one of the criteria in the SOC 2 reports. We also have a HIPAA, which is purely for healthcare data. We have some of the cloud security as a framework, which is a CCM controls, which also has the PII controls. And of course, we have the PCI DSS, which is mainly for cardholder data, which also in a way is PII data. The ISO 27001 is part of the 27000 family, and that's the background since when it started. And we have several certifiable standards within this family, and we have certain guidelines within this family. I'm not going to go in the depth of it, but we all would like to just keep this context that the family is there, and 27001 is part of the family. And now the 27701, which was announced in 2019, is gaining traction, which is also will be part of the family tree, but it's not depicted by the ISO as of now. So the 27,000 background is that it was as started as BS 7799, originally published by the BSI group, and then it later migrated to 27001. The latest certifiable standard is still 2013. I get a lot of questions on my email and my LinkedIn chats that what about 2018 standard updates, and when is the next standard going to come? So I understand the certifiable standard is still 2013, although there were some updates in 2018. But now there's a revision going on in the new standard, and I believe it should come sometime in 2022. Initially, with starting with the 27,002, and then the certifiable one, which is 27,001. But I don't have a timeline. Let's see when it actually comes. But sometimes in 2022, it is likely to happen. Maybe later half, not the initial half, at least. So, so we have about at least a year's time, so that we have the new framework in place for 27001. So coming to our discussion on 27701, right? It is used for privacy certification, privacy management, also known as the Privacy Information Management System, or the PIMS. So it was announced in 2019 in August, and it is an extension, as we said, to 27001. It helps to provide a clear visibility to data management and approaches to security for PII data with third parties, PIIs, controllers, etc. So that's the primary objective. The requirement would be that the organizations should be certified for 27001 to be have certified for 27701. So that's a mandate. So since it's an extension to 27001, the certification for 27001 is mandatory. Although it can be done parallelly together, but first you'll have to definitely get the 27001 certification and then the PIMS or the privacy certification. So that's the minimum requirement, right? And of course, we have the guidelines from the 27002 also for the privacy management, and the 27701 also aligns itself to the 27001, 27002, and several other um, uh, controls objectives actually are rather that is mentioned in the 27001 and the 27002. It covers your information security, operations management, physical and environmental security, access control, HR security, acceptable use, asset management, and of course we have some additional privacy controls that we will see today. We'll also see how what are the alignment to the standards and what exactly you will need to do, the PII controls and the implementation of PII controls to actually achieve certification. So achieving certification is easy said, but we will come to that and we will discuss that later sections today as to what are the challenges that companies actually face and what organizations should actually do to implement it in the correct manner. So it's not only that certification or the certificate we are trying to achieve. It is the process and the implementation of controls in the right manner that we should be attaining at, and certification would be automatic. And that should be the objective for every company to look at. So implementation of controls in the perspective of the standard, of course, 27701, and of course towards the compliance requirements also that we may have, either GDPR or the CCPA or the new Colorado Privacy Act or any other standard. Maybe Singapore has a standard. Several countries have their own standards or own compliance laws, rather, that we need to comply with. And the standards such as 27701 would help you to achieve those compliance uh, requirements actually. So that is the need of the hour, right? So we have a framework that we follow. We can take care of 70 to 80% of the compliance requirements, what it may be there today, or maybe in the future, whenever it comes. So the 27701 maps to the 29100 standard, which was a framework initially. And of course, it also maps to the GDPR and the DPA 2018 controls. It also integrates to other standards like the 27001 and the 27002, which is the guidelines. And of course, it gives you guidelines for implementing, maintaining, and continuous improvement of your PIMS, which is the ISMS requirement or the framework itself, right? The PDCA cycle that we will discuss. The mapping goes like this: 27,001, 29,000, 29,10, 29,151, 29,134, the GDPR. Of course, it's also mapped to the 27,018, which is the PII data for the public cloud. So if we look at the mapping to the ISO and we look at the standards of the framework, how the ISO follows, the default is the 1 to 3 clauses. Then the clause 4 is the general clause. Then they start with the specific clauses 5, which is relating to the PIMS requirements, right? And then clause 6. The clause 7 is more important from the implementation perspective, and it also provides a guidance to the PII controllers, and the clause 8 also provides guidelines for the PII processors per se. So this is important as to how do we need to implement the privacy to get ourselves certified for the 27701. So it is not that easy as it looks like, because the the 27001, we all got used to it, and we are already aware because it's been there since several years now. And since privacy is a new subject, and we see several companies facing challenges even today. Organizations like Facebook and every major company has PII data challenges, specifically when it owns its application. Because it's not easy to implement privacy, even if you have 27001. I've been working personally in the privacy field since the last 5 years, and I'm going to share some of my experiences today. Also, in the when we talk about the implementation, and and that's the reason why it's important for us to stay focused on the control objectives and the controls and how to implement it in the spirit of having the controls for the PII data and not just from achieving a certificate. So I'm just repeating this because it's important for us to focus on the control objectives and the controls and not just how to achieve the certificate. So let's focus our energies from that perspective. So the 3.1 states that they are joint PII controllers, right, which may have processing jointly for various PII data, and of course the management system of how you need to look at in the overall PDCA lifecycle of the management system itself. The clause 4, as we said, is talking about the context of the organization. Clause 5 talks of leadership, and clause 6 talks of planning, 7 talks of support. We're going to discuss more on clause 7 today because that is the most important aspects of implementing the PII, and then the operational aspects, which is clause 8, and performance evaluation, which is clause 9, and then the improvement lifecycle, which is the clause 10. Again, your context says, which is clause 5, of how you have your policies in place for the PII data, and how do you organize information security and privacy, and then how do you take care of HR aspects, asset management, access control, cryptography, physical and environment controls, and operational security, communications, acquisition, system acquisition, and development maintenance, which is one of the key areas where privacy is a major challenge, specifically if you are owning an application. Then supplier relationship, we know third party issues. We have seen the Facebook Cambridge Analytica issue where the API data is getting shared between organizations and there are no controls in place. So that's where we need to look at from a PII perspective. And then, of course, incident management is another area where companies face challenges in having incident management specifically for PII data. And of course, we are talking of business continuity, and of course, compliance is the driver for all of the certifications and the PII controls that we are trying to implement, GDPR, CCPA, and so on. So this is just I'm going to touch upon high level, but we are going to talk more on the implementation side today. But this is just for the context and to know where we are trying to achieve and what we are going to do to fill in the puzzles and the gaps from a ISO perspective. Because when the auditor comes, he's going to check for everything, whether your PII has been factored in across your several clauses. So you need to fine tune all your policies, processes to take care of the PII data itself, right? So if you're already certified for 27001, you will need to amend those policies to look at the process flows and the controls required for factoring in the PII data per se. Trust me, it's easy said, but it's really going to be a challenge, and it's going to take some resources, time, and effort for companies to adapt themselves to the PII controls, even if you have the 27001 standard implemented and certified. So a lot of organizations come to us and send us emails or calls. So PII data, we already have certified for 27001, and we already have our cookie policy. We already have our cookie policy posted on our website, and we already have the privacy policy. So please certify us for 27701 or the SOC 2 for privacy. Either way, but trust me, it's not that easy as it's said. Just having a cookie policy or privacy policies as part of your policies isn't going to lead you to 27701 certification or even SOC 2 for privacy. Trust me, I have worked on GDPR, CCPA, and all the controls, even for SOC 2 for privacy. It's not easy as it amounts to. And that is the reason you see several large companies paying billions of dollars of fines because they are unable to meet those compliance mandates. So coming to next, which is the operation control, performance evaluation, and improvement. So every aspect, what I'm trying to say is every aspect of these policies and processes which you have for ISO 27001, you will need to align themselves, adapt themselves to take care of the PII data. And specifically, if you're a product development company, you're having an application, it's really a major challenge because you have to do the privacy by design. When we talk of privacy by design, right from your application, maybe you need to re-engineer your application and get back to your drawing board to see how you can adapt to privacy into your application. So when we talk of information sec policies, we're talking of management direction, of course, the risk appetite, and the direction as to what is the mission for the organization, and against which what the policies are based on, right? And then how the information security is organized and factor in the HR, asset management, access control, cryptography, and of course the physical environmental security per se, of course. Then we have the details on the operational security, communication security, supplier relationships. We'll go in the depth in the implementation side. I'm going to skip this slide because it's a repetition, and we will discuss this when we are going to talk of the PII data and the privacy risk assessment. So some of the important clauses that we need to look at is the privacy impact assessment. So when we do 27001 implementation, one of the major factors is the risk assessment. For privacy, we need to do a DPIA or the privacy risk assessment, which is or maybe the starting point of your privacy journey. So we need to know clearly as to what is the PII information that we are storing, collecting, storing, processing, and so on, right? And that is a major challenge where organizations are still struggling to do. The first major point I feel is to have a clear data flow analysis to do a PIA. So organizations do a PIA without doing is flowing, and they simply jump to doing a privacy impact analysis. So privacy impact analysis is going to be a major factor and your basis of your entire controls. If you do your PIA right, you will be able to implement all the controls right. But if you do not address your risks and address your PIA concepts, if you do not have the whole data flow to do a PIA, so in my opinion, data flow diagram is the first step to do a PIA. If you don't have a stock of your data, if you don't have a data flows as to how your data is coming in, data is getting processed, collection, and the whole life cycle of the data, you will not be able to do a correct PIA. If you do not do a correct PIA, you will not be able to implement the controls correctly. You don't have visibility. If you don't implement the controls correctly, you will not be able to do a correct governance, right? So everything is linked, and you may be certified. I'm not denying that, right? I'm not coming into the certification aspect at all. I'm trying to look at compliance. So compliance is a major requirement than than the than the than the certification itself. So our objective should be compliance, and objective should not be certification. Certification is just a route, just to provide some assurance to organizations and your third parties that we have the processes. But compliance is a different aspect, and certification is a different aspect. If you're compliant, you may be automatically certified. But if you're certified, you may still not be compliant, right? So it's important for us to do it right, and it's important for us to have the right people, the right resources, the right understanding to implement privacy. So in the standard, we have annexures 8 to 5, which talks of control objectives for controllers. It talks about mapping to ISO 29100, talks to mapping as to 2718, 29151, mapping to GDPR, and mapping to other requirements per se, right? Um, it's important for us to look at the PDCA principle for every ISO implementation or any other security implementations or the certifications that we do for our organizations. The plan, do, check, and act, right? The planning is really, really important, because if we don't collect all our data, if we don't collect all our information, the planning is incorrect, we don't know what is there in our environment, we will not be able to doing part is doing the PIA, right? Implementing the controls. If your planning is incorrect, your implementation goes incorrect. If your implementation goes correct, your checking or monitoring goes incorrect, and you will not be able to act. You will not be able to comply with your privacy information of the privacy compliance requirements. So coming back to our risk assessment, the PIA, again, I would emphasize that this is one of your most important areas of doing privacy compliance, right? Trust me, many SMB organizations that I've seen have a simple sheet of risk assessment, having 12 risks, 15 risks, high level risks of one risk or one control for each control objective, right? Access control, for example, right? Physical access, physical security, right? Network security, one control objective and one control. We will implement controls, and they put a control that yes, we have controls in place, risk becomes low automatically. Trust me, the PIA or the risk management does not work like this, right? Many companies don't have visibility, don't have monitoring. Again, I'll go back to the PDCA cycle. It's important to know what you're doing. It's important to monitor your risks, which many companies lack, right? Just putting a risk assessment sheet is not doing risk management, right? I'll come to the NIST framework and other things where you can use, which you can use to do that. Of course, the ISO 31000 also is a good framework to do that. But for privacy, NIST has a specific framework which I would recommend many companies to do that. We'll see in the next controls. So trust me, guys, trust me, friends, that this is your most important area to focus on. It's not uh, it's not a just a checkbox. Okay, I have a risk management sheet, and please certify me for 27701. It is not going to work like this in an environment, right? So the benefits, of course, we need to understand what it can lead to, how is going to help us. Why should every company do a 27701 certification, right? So the idea is basically that we should demonstrate some assurance for privacy to our third parties. So since third party risks are important, it does definitely helps you to demonstrate that we have certain controls in place and we can take care of the third party data as required. Of course, the compliance is another major area. And of course, we also need to show and bring a trust to our data security standards with our third parties, that we are taking care of their data and we are complying to the international privacy laws and we are having a standard processes which should take care of their data in our environment as a service provider, as an application provider, or whatever data we are dealing with, or the PI, if we are processing a data or we are controlling a data, either way. Of course, it will help you even with the GDPR compliance. It can help you with CCP compliance, Colorado Privacy Act, and several other privacy acts which are there globally across the world now, following the GDPR suite. It's also important to compare, since we are focused on the SOC 2 reports. A lot of organizations also ask us that since we are already on SOC 2, whether we should go for ISO 27701 or we should go for SOC 2 and adding privacy controls within the SOC 2 framework, or the trust services criteria framework that has privacy criteria as part of it. So I'll just spend a few minutes to compare these two frameworks. So starting with SOC 2, SOC 2 has the 50 points of focus. So the ISO talks of control objectives, and the trust services criteria talks about points of focus and not control objectives, which are maybe equivalent in some aspects. So here we are talking of 50 points of focus, which is aligned to the GDPR, CCPA, and other requirements. Earlier, it was aligned to the old GAP, generally accepted privacy principles, which have been in use and have been adapted by several privacy laws, and it has been in use since the year 2008. And we all know as generally accepted privacy principles, but now it is obsolete. So the new privacy framework has come, and it's formulated by AICPA, which is superseding the gap, and of the new trust services criteria for privacy has been aligned to the privacy management framework of AICPA. Of course, it has the basic principles of security and privacy by design and limit controls, and most of the security principles have been defined by AICPA since the year 2008, where privacy was not being focused by many organizations. Only few organizations focus on privacy, security controls, and since then, AICPA has those principles, and it has been taken forward today in 2020, where the new PMF has been announced. The 27701, of course, is a ISO standard, which also is globally accepted, and of course, it follows the ISO basic controls, which we just saw from clause 4 until the clause 10, and of course, the annexed controls, so and so. So both the standards are well accepted, and when we saw the third-party tools, both these certifications are well accepted globally to achieve the certification. Of course, SOC 2 provides an additional layer of operating effectiveness of controls and is a year-to-year or a test report, I would say, rather than ISO certificate, which is valid for 3 years, and only you do a certification from the first year, you do surveillance audits in the second and the third years. So auditors only need to provide the report, and organizations need to provide a certificate. It does not list which specific controls have been implemented. Your certificate will not show what controls have been implemented in your organizations. However, the SOC 2 for privacy will definitely show your third parties, will elaborate as to what controls exactly have been implemented, how they have been implemented, and what are the auditor's comments on each of those controls. So that provides more assurance to your customers, to third parties, than even the ISO 27701, of course. But the downside is the 27701 can be put on your website. The SOC 2 the SOC 2 cannot be put on your website with the controls inside. You need an NDA to share it with your clients. However, if you go for the SOC 3 report, the SOC 3 report can do something similar to what ISO 27701 can do. You can put it on your website and provide the assurance to your customers. coming now to the implementation, we just have 10 minutes, 7, 8, 9 minutes. I'd like to complete the implementation and certification aspects. So coming to implementation, we all know the implementation process: plan and initiate, onboarding consultants on the auditors, compliance, documentation, awareness, implementing controls, internal audit, and the certification. Now, the implementation guidance on the PIA has been provided in the standard itself, right? It talks about consent, talks of performance of the contract, compliance with legal obligation, GDPR, whatever local laws are there for you, protection of vital interest of PIA principles, performance of tasks carried out in public interest, legitimate interest for the PIA controllers. So these are some of the guidance given for implementation in the PIA, which I would rather suggest every company to pay their major focus on this aspect, right? So it also talks of PII processing, and the risk should be assessed to the privacy impact assessment. That's what I was been emphasizing on. The criteria could include automated decision making, of course, which includes large scale data, maybe PCI data or healthcare data, biometric data, depending on what data are you collecting, storing, and processing, etc. So we also need to look at the elements that would impact our privacy impact assessment, and where the PII data is stored, how it is transferred. I was talking of the data life cycle. So that would be your first step even before you do a PIA. So unless you have a data flow analysis, you may not be able to do a PIA right. NIST provides some sample ways how you can do a data flow analysis, but you could follow your own way. But trust me, you will need to put all your data flows in place before you do a PIA. Privacy by design is an important aspect which we discussed earlier. Now I'm going to give you a case, just a call from one company that wanted a privacy certification for the application. A well-known company, I would say, doing a SaaS services, collecting some information from the general public per se, right? They wanted SOC 2 for privacy for a back period. And when we asked them that how do you have privacy by design, since you are having an application, and if the controls are not implemented in your application, you will have to redesign your application and go back to your drawing board, right? And state exactly what are you collecting, right? Like limit collection, processing, accuracy, minimization, and all of these controls which are given in the ISO standard. How are you going to maintain, right? They had no answer to it, right? Honestly, and they never came back to us. And so I'm just trying to tell you that it is not that you call an auditor and tell them, oh, we want to get certified for privacy, because privacy has to be done by design. Specifically, if you are an application owner, it increases your resource and certification factor by at least 4 to 5 times than if you then for non-application owners. Of course, even there's a challenge, but the application will involve application re-engineering. You will need to go back to your drawing board, and that's why we see several of these challenges by the application companies, because it 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 increases the life cycle of implementing privacy by design. It's easy said, but difficult to be done. But however, we will still need to do that to comply with the regulations such as the GDPR and whatever regulations we need to. Even if you need to get your application maybe certified, you will need to demonstrate that how have you implemented this privacy by design, so that an auditor can get satisfied as to you have the processes, you are taking care of the control, you are doing data, what do you call, de-identification. And de-identification is an important aspect. Maybe you use tokenization, or maybe you whatever way to do de-identification, which many companies still lack the processes to do de-identification of data, right? And of course, if the data identified data is lost, you can face several challenges and compliance mandates and fines, which you have seen in the news in the last 1 or 2 years, right? So retention life cycle. One organization, when we audited, they say we retain the data for lifelong. We don't dispose the data at all. and that was the answer that we got when we had audited. So they changed based on our advice. They changed their policy. They changed their life cycle, and only they have now written the data for only for that specific period. So the entire life cycle of the data will have to be defined on day one before you start to implement privacy and privacy by design. So coming to NIST privacy framework, it is a good framework for organizations to use for doing your PIA, privacy impact assessment, or the DPIA, whatever you call. The framework talks about the core NIST fundamentals, which is identification, governance, control, communication, and protect, right? Which is the core. And then you have a profile. You set a target as to what you want to achieve, and then you have a current target as to where you are, and that's your gap analysis basically, right? You define what you want to achieve, you see where you are, and then based on the gaps you assign your resources as to what you want to achieve in what span of time, and you make a project plan to achieve those requirements in that span of time, right? And of course it will help you to implement and come to a maturity level. One may be partial, second is risk informed, third is repeatable, and fourth is the adaptiveness. So this is at a high level framework that you can use to implement privacy in your organization. And the other framework is, of course, the COVID 2019, the standard which is can be adapted for privacy governance. Governance is an important aspect. If you look at the PDCA cycle, we're talking of after the do, check, and act. So checking is governance is also a part of checking, right? Many organizations, as we said earlier, just do a risk assessment sheet, assessment and not management. So understand, we need to do a management, and doing it for doing a privacy management, you need to do the privacy governance, right? Governance is part of it, right? You need to somebody needs to manage, somebody needs to govern. It's part of the check act itself, right? You can use a framework which has managed projects, so you can use this as a managing the privacy governance as a project itself. You can use the managed data, which is APO 14. You can also use managed assurance for managing your compliance. So the COBIT also can be adapted as a governance framework for managing your privacy governance itself, right? We talked about the several uh, 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 aspects within the COBIT, which is the EDM01, which is ensured governance framework for setting and maintenance, right? You provide a governance approach for your data. We ensure risk optimization. Then we talk of managed risks. We talk of managed data. We talk of managed assurance. So some of these controls at a high level can give you more of a governance picture. And of course, you can use the ISO or the SOC to go into the specific controls, and you can make a mix of the standards to definitely see where you stand at the privacy management and privacy governance, right? So the COBIT can give you a high level picture. The low level picture can be given under the specific controls or the points of focus given in the SOC 2 or in the ISO or various other standards that you may adapt, right? So finally, our objective as a certification body is to audit you and to certify you. So we as an auditor have a boundary that we cannot cross. So we can only tell you like this in webinars as to how you can do and what you should be doing. We are not a consulting company, and we will not be able to do the consulting and the implementation for you. However, if you come to us for auditing and you are ready, we can, as part of the webinar, we can tell you and show you what are the tools available and how you need to implement at and in your environment, and then we can audit you, and we can of course certify you either for SOC 2 for privacy or the ISO 27701 or 7000 series at the 27001 or joint certification. Or we have done SOC 2 for privacy and even ISO certifications jointly, which will help you save time, costs, and money, right? Of course, this is a certification process, and I think we don't have anything more. And I am just on time at 12:45 to get to the questions. Again, this is a disclaimer before we go to the question and answer section. Ava will help us with that. But in case you have any questions, you can email us at info@sej.io. We'll be glad to help you. And this disclaimer is that we did not give you this advise as a consultant or a professional advisor. These are just generic standards that you can use to implement in your organization, right? And this should not come back to us and cannot be given to us that okay, you said this and we are not accountable for this presentation. The presentation was only at a high level for discussion purposes only. Coming back to the Q&A, right? So Alva, can we check who all have any
Yes.
questions if they have anything?
Hello. Yeah. So we have certain questions. I would also like to request others that if you have more questions, then please post it on the Q&A box. So I'll just be reading out the questions now. Our first question is that will the presentation, so we've got like two, three similar questions, and they are pertaining to the similar context, which is that will this session or presentation will be available for later reference?
Yeah. So the answer to the question is this session was recorded and it will be recorded automatically and will be sent to you as a link in the automated platform which you use, which is Zoho. So I think Alva, we can when you are sending those settings, make sure that recording is available and everybody gets the recording. So we don't share the slides, but recordings can be the link will be given for recording for this. I
Okay.
hope this answers the question.
Yeah, so I hope this answers the question for everybody who, wants to refer to this at a later point in time. So yes, the recording will be available for you all, but definitely not the slides. Coming to the next question is that do you provide SOC consultancy and certification?
So the answer is that as I already informed just now that we being an audit focused company, we have certain lines that we cannot cross, right? So it's a make or check a system. You cannot check your own work. Somebody else needs to check your work, right? So that goes into any audit process or anything that you do. You have a make or checker process, right? Whether it's accounting or whether it's controls, whether it's implementation or whether it's anything. Same thing applies even here. We cannot implement for you. We can audit for you. In a webinar like this, we can tell you what your approach should be and how you should be doing things. But definitely the doing part is still yours, right? As an audit focused company, we will not be able to implement it for you, and that's the ISO restriction. That is the AICPA restriction for independence purposes, right? So that's the line which we cannot cross. The implementation you'll have to be done by you. We can refer to you for certain implementation companies whom we work with, but we cannot say okay, go with this or go with them or go with them. We are not partnered at 100%. Okay, only this they will implement and we will audit. We cannot have certain. Also, we can refer to you to certain 8 to 10 companies. You can choose between them if you need us to refer. Otherwise, you are free to get somebody of your own onto it. I hope that I answered that question.
Okay. Our next question is that do you have the ISO 27001 standard which you could share with us?
So these standards are specifically bought standards and licensed to only the organizations who buy it from ISO.org. It is illegal to share those standards, and we cannot share any standards. And even if you are anybody sharing it, it is illegal. They should not be doing it legally, right? And we don't want to do anything illegal. And we being an audit focused company, we don't share any standards to anybody. You can always buy them online, and we do not want to get into the wrong hands of the law for doing our job.
Then we have another question. Somebody wanted the email ID, so you can check the answered box. I've already shared the email ID. Just to reiterate, it is info@assideer.io. So coming to the next question, we have somebody who wants to know that is there any training provided for completing certification in privacy for individuals?
So currently we are working on it. As of now, it's not, but in the going future, you may have from us.
Okay. Uh, we have a last question, which is that for external audit of ISO 27001 and PIMS, certain impaneled is mandatory?
No, 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 no. Certain empanelment is only in India. Certain is an Indian standard. It doesn't talk of auditing on ISO standards. So there's no mandatory to get yourself certain empanelment for doing an ISO certification. ISO certification is under the ISO body, which is a global body. There's no mandate to do a SOC 2 audit or ISO audit. You need to be empaneled with certain, which is only in India. We are doing certifications across the globe, right? So it is not required for an ISO certification body to get listed in all the countries in the world. Right? It's not required.
Okay. Yes, I think that was the
I
last
think there's
question that
there's
I
one more
have.
question. I think there's one more question. So somebody asked if certification is not a compliance, that how you attest organization as a CPA. So it's an interesting question. Thank you for asking this. So so attesting to an organization is under the TSC Trust Services criteria, which is mandated points of focus. So we are only certifying you against a criteria which is defined by AICPA, whether you have those controls specifically or not. But if you're asking us to attest to GDPR, that is a compliance attestation. We are not attesting to GDPR. We are not attesting you to CCPA. We are only attesting you to the 27701 standard or the SOC 2 for privacy, which is the trust services criteria standard. We are only saying you are complying with these controls or the control objectives or the points of focus mentioned in that particular standard or the framework per se. The GDPR requirement maybe 20% may be different, or 10% may be different, or the CCPA requirement may be 20% different. So the SOC 2, unless all the GDPR controls are into it, so may not relate to the compliance of GDPR. So SOC 2 for privacy, you may have got attested, but you may still not be compliant to GDPR. So there are two different things. Attestation does not mean compliance, and compliance does not mean attestation. Either way.
Okay. I think we have one more new question. Who all are required for SOC 2 audit?
Who all are, I didn't get the question. So if you can elaborate your question again, that will be great.
I think Mr. Saurabh, you've asked this question. If you can just elaborate and give us more clarity. Okay, so he's asking which kind of organization is required for SOC 2 audit.
So every service organization would provide services to other companies is are certifying for or getting attested to SOC audits actually. So if you're a service provider generally, or even for internal certifications or internal assurances, you may go for SOC 2. Same way for ISO 27001 goes, right? Who all goes for ISO 27001, right? Same way companies go for SOC 2 also. Same way. Same set of organizations.
Okay, yeah, so do we have any other questions?
So I think since there are no more questions, close up. I think we are in time, 5 minutes. We are before time, and we'll give that back to
So we have
our
one last
attendees.
question.
And
Do you think
once
you can
again,
take
thank
that?
you. What is it? Maybe.
We have one more question. Do you think you can take that?
Yeah, SEBI understanding is correct, but it is not. It is right to say that COVID can be used to govern ISO or DPA in your organization. COVID can is a framework which you can use to govern any kind of frameworks or multiple frameworks or even anything in your organization. It's a IT governance framework which you can adapt even for privacy, even for data governance. Any kind of governance in terms of IT and data, you can adapt to using COVID.
Okay.
That's it. So can we close the session? Thank you, everybody. We'll close the session now. And thank you again for joining in. If you have any questions, you can please send them on an email. We'll be happy to address them. Thank you once again. Thank you.